thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your life.
Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Clare Crew.
This is episode number 41 of the Thriving Children podcast. I'm Clare Crew, and in this episode, I'll be chatting with Natalie Smith from Brilliant Boys. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Hi, Claire. How you going?
Well, thank you. Now, I didn't know whether I was going to confess to this or not, but we have had this chat twice already, and both times we have had a glitch with the recording. So you're an awesome sport for coming back and doing it again, and I think it should be a nice flowy chat because we kind of know what we want to cover now.
I think it's going to be good.
So the focus of today's conversation is all about the development and play of boys, because unlike how a lot of us think, boys and girls are actually quite different developmentally and behaviourally as well. So first of all, I'd just love to hear when you first became interested in this topic.
Okay, so I've always kind of been drawn to the boys in the class. I think even growing up I was more of a tomboy than a girly girl. And I started noticing, I had a class in my fifth year of teaching that had 22 boys and 7 girls. And it was a real eye-opener to me. Like I cried many nights in my first term just because, you feel like by your fifth year you kind of got it going on and you know what you're doing. And I did, but nothing was working the way it was supposed to and the way it used to. So it really made me step back and go, okay, I don't know enough about boys and I really need to find out more. So I started researching and I contacted a few different schools I was in Perth at the time, that were all boys' school like Trinity and places like that, and just started talking to some of the teachers there about, what do you find that's different, what works better for you. And then I started implementing a few things and changing a few things which started to work. But of course, I didn't know enough, and being a teacher, you don't have enough time to really get to the nitty-gritty with everything else you've got to do. So it wasn't really until I had my first child, which was a son, and then I had a little bit more time, and I say that loosely because as a parent you don't, but, I had a little bit more time to kind of research, and I came across Michael Gurian's work with the Gurian Institute in the United States, and that really changed everything for me because that's when I started to go, right, their brains are different. Okay, their bodies are different. Their hormones are different. That makes sense. And also Steve Biddulph's work as well was a big game changer for me. I read It's Raising Boys before my son was born. Didn't know I was having a boy, but I read it anyway. had a feeling. And I just started to realise, these little boys that were coming through and all the boys that I'd had in my literacy work that were struggling were all boys. And the girls were doing quite well, or they seemed to be doing, well. The girls kind of do have their own issues, but they hide it a little bit better because they want to please us. It was a little bit more stand out with the boys. So that's where I kind of started getting involved in boys' education.
And now that's pretty much the focus of what you do through Brilliant Boys.
Yes, it is, yeah. So I go out to schools and centres and conferences and talk about, boys' play and their needs in class and how people, teachers can change what they do just to cater better for it and understand them better. And the response is amazing. I did a conference, which was probably one of my first ones in Albany a couple of years back, and my room was packed out. And it wasn't because anyone knew who I was. They weren't coming to me because I was someone, that everyone knew. It was because they really wanted to know, like, help me. What do I do with the boys in my class? I'm pulling my hair out. I feel like I'm not doing enough. I had people in tears, and that's exactly how I remember feeling. Like they just wanted to know how they could help them, and it was just such a nice feeling to know that I was doing, something to help these gorgeous little creatures.
Absolutely. And so everyone listening in is also wanting to know, what do you know about boys? Let's get into that nitty-gritty stuff. How is a boy's brain actually different from that of girls?
Yeah, so there's different parts of their brain that mature at different times. And in having said that, you do get your boys who are a little bit more advanced, and of course you get your girls that are a little bit more like boys as well. And that has a lot to do with their experiences from a very early age as well. So there's environmental factors there that come into play. So a boy that's read to a lot will have a lot more language development than one who's not. Same with girls. Girls who can have differing levels of hormones as well will be different and be a bit more like a boy, and a bit more of a tomboy. So the differences are really in the language centre of the brain. So the frontal lobe, which facilitates speech, thought and emotion, matures much earlier in girls and has a lot more increased blood flow. So this aids their verbal communication skills and their need for less risk-taking, whereas boys have that in play where they want to take risks and their verbal communication isn't as good. The limbic centre of the brain, which is your amygdala, is bigger in boys, so they have a heightened flight or fight response, which is what they needed primitively when they were hunters. So that hasn't changed, and that's why generally you'll see when a boy's upset or hurt or frustrated, what it comes out as is not, oh, I'm really upset, which would be more of a girl kind of response to tell you how they're feeling, or they just get upset, is that they go to anger and aggression because that's their fight or flight response kicking in. So
super interesting.
Yeah.
And that's normal to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, it is. And particularly in little boys, they're still developing, their ability to self-regulate and control their body movements and all of those things. So they're constantly getting in trouble at school and in, centres where they need to sit still and get along with people and all of those things. And I think that we've kind of forgotten that they are still developing that, and their brain is still developing in those centres, and so we're expecting so much from them. And they, you hear your classic, teacher say, "Why can't you be more like the girls? Boys, why can't you be more like the girls?" And it's really unfair because they just can't at that stage. They just can't. So they've got that. So the fight or flight centre is really big for them. Their cerebral cortex, which controls higher intellectual functions and memories and interprets sensory impulses, which is really a big one for boys because they are very, very sensory. They have less neural connections in that area, so it takes a while for those to develop. So the more sensory activities they have in class where they can really get in and learn using their senses is far better for them because it'll increase those neural connections. Neurologists believe that boys' brains are wired for dominance behaviours, which is why they want to be the alpha male, why they want to be in charge and they want to be strong and brave and tough and all those things, which primitively they needed to do. It's like we're kind of forcing them into this little school box and this centre box, and they're just not fitting in. And I kind of feel like they're almost at a deficit when they enter school because our system and the curriculum and its expectations, the lack of developmentally appropriate activities and the downplay of the importance of play have led to boys not fitting the mould and not being nurtured correctly in school.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I guess, to an extent, I also think the system isn't meeting the needs of girls, but I would agree that even more so for boys, and probably I think you're more likely to see, as you were saying, when a boy's needs aren't being met because they're going to let you know in their behaviour.
Absolutely.
Whereas with girls being a bit more eager to please and wanting to fly under the radar, perhaps we're not going to get a true picture of how disengaged they are from what we're doing.
Yep, absolutely. And it is true, girls do need exactly the same amount of physical time to get their brains moving and get their brains working properly, but they display it in different ways. They have a little bit more impulse control, so they're able to sit for longer and but they still do need the same physical amount that boys do.
It would have been so obvious in that class you had with 22 boys. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
It would have been so obvious when you hadn't really made a day movement based enough or sensory based enough. Like your reflection at the end of the day would have just been so spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I did notice was that because the boys were so, loud and dominant, which is just natural for them, the girls started doing it too because they weren't getting heard. I had these, and they were such a beautiful class of kids. They really were, and their mums were just the most supportive class of parents I've ever had. So there was no issue in terms of, God, they were awful class or anything like that. They were beautiful, beautiful children. But when they were all together, they just needed to be outside. They just needed to find out who they were as little human beings and who was the alpha and, all of that. And it was they were just struggling all the time. And then I was struggling because I wasn't providing the right environment for them because I didn't know. And when I started researching, it actually made me quite angry to think, why didn't they cover this at university with me? I would have been a far better teacher if I'd known this stuff. So.
Oh, I know. There's so much that's, 4 years, that's a lot of learning, but there's a whole lot of rubbish in there that doesn't need to be there, and there's a whole lot that just doesn't even exist. It's not even talked about, gender differences, and special ed is completely skimmed over. And you think, well, at the end of the day, in every group of children that we're going to teach as an educator, we are going, unless we're in like a single-sex school, we're going to have a mixture of boys and girls, and we are going to have at least one, but probably, 5+ children with additional needs. Yeah. So why aren't they actually equipping us for reality?
Yes, exactly. And with the way it's going, 1 in 8 children with sensory issues and that now, and lots of them are boys. We're going to need a lot more education in that field. So
we are. And I guess that, the tricky thing is it's not just about what teachers don't know. There's a lot more and more like you and I that have searched for answers beyond our training, but then actually making it fit within the system these days and the national curriculum, that is the next kind of stumbling block.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, coming from a teaching background, I desperately feel sad for teachers now because I know the pressure they're under, and I know that a lot of them are doing things that they don't feel are appropriate, and that would break me.
Yeah, it breaks many.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened to that chat I had with Kathy Margolis a few weeks back. Yeah. I think she just really summarises beautifully how disengaged a lot of educators with their heart in the right place are feeling and becoming.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so getting back on track, what kind of play are boys naturally drawn to? Okay,
so if you're looking at your typical, boy play, if you want to put it in a kind of a box context, it's physical stuff. It's that drive for them to want to get out those, physical impulses and their need for that input and that sensory connection with the environment that they're in that leads them to do, your sensory and your messy play because they love that stuff. They're physical play, they're rough and tumble stuff. Role play, they love role play, they love dressing up, they love being somebody else for a little while. Superhero play and your war and weapon play are your two big ones, and they're the ones that cause a lot of controversy in centres. And then you've got your ones that are a little bit more acceptable, like your block and construction play and your puzzle play, which we accept are really good for the brain, and we're taught that at university. And we let them do it and we let them go for it. But it's the more physical stuff, the stuff that doesn't fit in the four walls of a classroom, that causes a lot of trouble. And that's why boys kind of disengage a little bit from their classroom environment.
Because, they don't really feel accepted and appreciated for who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah, I remember reading an article by Michael Thompson, who wrote Raising Cain, which was one of the best books I ever read. And he said, a boy is play. To a 4 and a 5-year-old boy, that is everything that they are about. So when you say to a boy, don't play like that, or I don't like the way you're doing that, or we don't play with guns here and things like that, then that's when a boy goes, oh, hang on, they don't like me. They see that immediately because they don't have those higher level, emotional thought processes. They can't say, oh, okay, well, she doesn't want me to play with that gun, or he doesn't want me to play with that gun because it's upsetting someone. They just go, oh, that person doesn't like me. And they take it very personally because everything about them is what they're playing. So it's really important that we kind of, when we understand their play a bit better, then we can, cater for it a bit better and make them feel more accepted and nurtured in the environment they're in.
I think that's huge because, so often boys are told off for their play being a bit too boisterous or inappropriate. And I don't think many of the parents and teachers that are, telling them to tone things down would really realise the implications of what they're saying to that child.
Yeah, and I think what I've come across too in doing this talks with teachers too is that they don't want to do it. They don't want to put a stop to it because they know that it is ingrained in them because, you'll say don't do it and then they'll go off somewhere where you're not looking at them and they'll still do it. So there's a need for it and teachers know that and they say, we have this policy at school where we don't play with guns and I know that we need to stop it, but why do they keep wanting to do it? Like, how can I, keep it under control but not break their spirit? They want to actually know and you do, of course you do get some people that don't like gunplay at all and that's when I say to people, as educators that why don't you like it? Look at yourself. Ask yourself the hard questions. What is your opinion of that play? What does it mean to you? What's happened in your life to make you feel the way that you feel about gunplay and weapon play? Because when you understand how you're feeling, then you can step outside of yourself for a little while and support the child that wants to play that way. Because I think we get, because we're all brought up differently and we, all have our own value systems, we get very caught up in, this is what I value, and so this is what I'm going to pass on to the children in my care, that we don't actually kind of step back and go, well, maybe that's not right for that child. And if it's right for me, I'm a grown adult. I've been through being a child and I've had those opportunities. I need to let these little creatures have these opportunities to develop into the adult they're going to become. So there was a really good book that I read called Under Dead Man's Skin by Jane Catch, and it's discovering the meaning of children's violent play because it's the violent part of the play that generally puts teachers off and puts, administrations off and even other parents in the class as well. And what you have to say is that's fair enough. Not everyone is going to agree with it. Okay, and it does make people very uncomfortable because if you look at what we see in the media and the gun attacks and the violence and things that, are pulled out to sensationalise the media so that people will actually watch it, none of the fluffy good stuff that's happening around the world is put on display because it's not, people don't want to know, it's not sensational enough. So we get scared, and we get scared for our children. And so when we're presented with that in a play scene, our initial reaction is, oh my gosh, that child's going to kill someone. Like when they get older, they're going to do something. If I don't stop it now, what's that child going to turn into? What's their future? But we need to then step back and go, that child's 5. That child innately does not want to kill someone. They don't, in their play, it's totally different to the way that we view play. They don't want to hurt someone. And within that war play scenario, when they're acting it out, when they do, play and they play and shoot someone that's in their group that they're playing with, that develops empathy because they look at, the child that's fallen down and is pretending to die and, they laugh about it and all of that. But there is that part of them that goes, oh, I don't really like that. I didn't like the fact that I hurt someone, even though you don't physically hurt them, but it's there. They understand that, and that's what we want them to experience. We want them to develop that empathy, and it's through those kinds of things and through superhero play where they're rescuing each other and, helping out and being good role models that they develop that sense of empathy, which is really important for boys because they don't learn empathy by you telling them things. They learn it by experiencing it and seeing it. So interesting because empathy probably is not what comes to mind. To be honest, even with me, that's not what comes to mind when I'm thinking about that rough play or gunplay. I'm not really seeing it and going, okay, well, they're developing empathy. And empathy is something we want all of our young ones to learn. Absolutely.
And I think as well, obviously what is seen or experienced in that child's life is going to come through in their play as well.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I agree. I think that the superhero play and the gunplay, it's there innately, even if they haven't seen those kind of movies, it's still there. But then children who, I think it was in the Free to Learn book that I just read by Peter Gray, he was talking about children's play in the Holocaust. And, in the camps, when they had opportunities to play, the children would actually be carrying out, similar acts of violence that they were seeing and experiencing themselves personally. And it was a way of making sense of it all and a way of healing.
It is. It's what's the word for it? It's like they're processing what's happening to them, and they're sorting it out in their heads, and they're going, where does this fit? Am I this person? Do I agree with this? Do I like this? It's just, it's cathartic, it's getting it out of their system. And that's, and the good thing about when you do see children engaging in that kind of play, that really deep emotional stuff is coming out, that's a perfect opportunity for adults to have a look and say, that little person needs help right now. And when we're putting a stop to it, we're putting a stop to that child being able to process all of that stuff, and we're also putting a stop to us being able to step in and help that child in other ways and help them work through what's going on in their lives. Because, then they won't come up to us and say, this is happening to me, unless they've got that really good verbal communication and that understanding and that emotional literacy. So when we're seeing it in their play, that's vitally important for us as adults to be able to help that child to process what's going on in their lives and help them get out of a situation that could be potentially really dangerous. So, putting a stop to it, can cause more issues than what we actually want.
So in your opinion, gunplay or, a child who's often kind of got a weapon, a pretend weapon or block that's a weapon in their pocket, that's all good.
Yep.
Is there any point where we do need to worry or we do need to reel it in?
Oh, absolutely. And if you want to start incorporating it into your centre, there's steps that you need to go about to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Because if you just go, okay, now I'm going to accept it and I'm going to let it happen, you're going to come across parents that don't want it there. You're going to come across the admin that don't want it there, the educators that work with you that don't want it there. So it's something that you really need to do as a centre, to sit down and say, this is the research that I've done. I don't want to put my boys off wanting to be at school, because they do, eventually start tuning out to wanting to be there if they personally feel all the time that they're not valued. So this is what I want to do. And you work out a plan and say, I want to start incorporating this. Then you go to the parents and you say, we're going to start doing this. And this is the reasons why. And I don't want you to feel at any time that you can't come to me and talk about what's going on. If your child is not happy, then please come to me and talk to me about it. Not every child needs to be incorporated into that play. And that's when you sit down with the children next and you say, I want to start introducing this in our classroom. And the boys all cheer. And some of the girls do. But these are the rules, and what can we do? And you work it out with them, because, they're great. They have that wanting to please each other as well and wanting to help each other innately in them. So they'll come up with rules with you to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And if there are children that don't want to participate at all, then those children need to be talked about with the class. So, Johnny doesn't want to do it and Crystal doesn't want to do it. So let's make sure that when you're playing, you keep them out of the game because they don't feel comfortable and safe when you're playing it. Come up with other rules, like we don't put it at each other's faces because that can make people feel uncomfortable. Things like that. Work it out with your class, because every class is going to be different. And then, take that back to the parents too. These are the rules that we've come up with, and we're going to go with it. And it is going to be something that will take time, because if it's been something in your centre that has been excluded completely, then it will take time to implement it and get to know it, so and make it work properly. But it's really important that you do, because you do have little boys just not feeling like they're a part of their class, not feeling comfortable being there, and you want them to be there. And there are so many benefits that do come from that kind of play. It's not just the developing empathy and that, it's developing friendships. Boys like to be physical, and they like to run around, and they like to do all of those things. And it's like gunplay, war and weapon play, and superhero play is universal. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, whether you can speak English or whether you can, you know, run fast or whatever, they can join in. They don't have to talk to each other. As long as you can make pew, pew, pew noises and run around, you're in, you know. So it's really good for children who are coming into a centre that don't have those really strong language skills. But they will learn them as they're talking and as they're playing with their peers as well. So, you know, you're discounting that when you start, you know, stopping it. You also want them to develop that morality as well, because it's really important that they start knowing right from wrong and what's, you know, going to help someone, what's not going to help someone. So gunplay, war and weapon play, superhero play in particular is all about morals. And, you know, all the things that superheroes encompass is what we want our children to grow up to be. You know, we want them to be, you know, people that will help, people that will save the day, people that will put their brain before their brawn. Because if you look at, you know, superheroes and you look at, you know, who they are, they're all normal people that are very successful and very smart in what they do, and then they turn into superheroes when they're needed. So we want those qualities. We want them to be able to put the brain before the brawn and develop those skills of empathy and helping people, which is really important with superheroes. And I think superhero play is kind of a lot more accepted in centres than war and weapon play is.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. But maybe not as much as it should be, because listening to you say that, it kind of, it rings true with fairy tales. You know, it's almost like a slightly more boyish version of fairy tales.
Absolutely.
These stories that are kind of handed down from generation to generation.
Yep.
that teach us, you know, about the choices we make and what happens when things go wrong and what happens when things go right.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look back, you know, years before we had Iron Man and superhero, you know, Superman and Hulk and all of them, we had Achilles and Hercules and all of those myth stories that boys identified with. So it's not anything that's new since the superheroes came into play. You know, we had the superhumans and back then. And boys want to be big. They want to be brave. They want to, you know, be the good guy that saves the day. They just want to be strong and brave and powerful. And when they're, you know, 5 and 6, they don't have a lot of power. So that kind of play gives them that sense of accomplishment and power and in control of an environment where they don't have a lot of control. So it's really important for them.
Yeah, just beautiful. And all the more reason why children need as much playtime as possible during the school day, but also when they come home as well. Because I think, you know, partly the type of play that is innate to them is often restricted. But then on top of that, there's not, you know, if so much of their learning is coming from this interaction together, the social exchange, the story, the sensory and movement elements, there's just not enough time for that if we're not valuing it.
Absolutely. And that's when you see more problems come up in the later parts of their schooling in primary school, because they haven't had that chance to work out who they are as people, little people, to develop, you know, a control over their aggressive impulses, their just impulse control in general. Also negotiating skills. There's so much negotiating and, you know, figuring out who's going to do this and who's going to do that and sorting out arguments and all of that, which we shouldn't be involved in. We need to step back and just let them sort it out, unless it's getting physical and then you kind of have to step in. But, you know, let them, they're really good at sorting things out if we allow them the time, and play is what provides them with that time. It's so important for them.
It has been wonderful chatting with you, Natalie, and I'm super excited because the icon on my screen says that we are still recording. Yay! And I didn't say this at the start, but I met Natalie at the Play conference, albeit briefly, and we weren't able to see each other's presentations because we kept presenting at the same time. But this has been a really awesome way to get to know Natalie a lot more and finally hear some of what she has to offer about boys and how their development and play is very much unique to them.
Yes, love them.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
You can't, they do have a superpower of their own, boys, don't they?
Do.
So where can we find you online, Natalie?
Okay, so I'm on Facebook under Brilliant Boys. There's a page there that has lots of information on it, and the photo album has all different types of links to different research articles and videos and stuff that you can find on there. I'm also at www.brilliantboys.com.au. And on my website is listed my contact details there. I'm based just out of Perth, so I'm available for stuff. I've done stuff in Tasmania and Melbourne, and further on in the year there'll be some more. So, but yeah, I'm available to come out to schools and centres and talk about boys, because it's good to get that conversation going and get some more people on board fighting for our little boys, because they really need it.
Oh, they really, really do. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on the podcast, Natalie.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And for being a good sport and coming up more than once. And for the listeners, that is the end of another episode of the Thriving Children podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourselves.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.